"One pill and she'll never wake up," he whispered. Esther froze. One choice would decide life or death. Subscribe now and discover the truth. The morning light spilled over Victoria Island like gold brushed across water. Palm trees swayed lazily, and the gates of the Adeyemi mansion slid open with the quiet hum of machinery. The mansion was white stone, its walls gleaming under the sun, its tall windows reflecting the sky like still mirrors. It was a house built to command respect, to intimidate outsiders with its quiet perfection. Inside, the air carried the faint aroma of jasmine tea and freshly baked bread. A woman moved from room to room, her footsteps soft on the polished marble. Her name was Esther, and she had been awake since before dawn. She always was. She polished the glass railing by the staircase until her reflection stared back at her. She straightened the velvet cushions in the living room, aligning them with military precision. She checked the batteries in the remote control, counted the wine glasses before the afternoon meeting, and smoothed the long blue curtains so that not a single crease showed. Her hands moved quickly, but her eyes were sharper still. She noticed a scuff on the grand hallway wall, and without hesitation, she covered it with a framed photograph of the family. Esther did these things not only because she was a maid, but because she understood something deeper. Homes could look peaceful on the outside while hiding storms within. She had lived that truth. Years earlier, she had lost both parents in quick succession, as though the same cruel wind had blown out two candles in the same night. Since then, her life had been a patchwork of small jobs, borrowed beds, and days when even a bench under a bridge had to serve as shelter. She had learned to be quick, quiet, and careful. She had learned to bring calm to spaces that carried tension. When she was hired to work for Madame Adana 3 months earlier, she told herself silently, "Give this house your best. Make it run like a song." Madame Adana noticed. She was the billionaire CEO of one of the largest textile companies in Nigeria. Her fabrics, elegant and bold, hung in boutique windows from Yaba to Lekki. She was a woman of presence, tall, graceful, with a voice that could command a room or soothe a child. Yet in private moments, she was simply a woman who wore blue lace gowns, glasses on a chain, and enjoyed talking about the sound of rain after a storm. Sometimes, after long nights of work, she would invite Esther into her study for tea. They would sit together at the wide mahogany table. "So your hands are careful," Madame said once, watching Esther arrange fresh roses. "Careful hands keep a home from breaking." Esther lowered her gaze shyly and replied, "Careful eyes too, Madame." The mansion was beautiful, but Esther soon realized beauty was only a surface. There was one shadow in the house, and it carried the name of Mr. Daniel Adeyemi. He was Adana's husband, a man of 55, tall, handsome, and outwardly charming. But Esther noticed details that others ignored, the way his smile never reached his eyes, the sharp edge to his laugh, the shoes he left tossed in the living room as if to remind others of his carelessness. He did not work. He didn't have to. He flew on Adana's private jet, drove her cars, and sat at her company dinners with the ease of a man who had always known comfort. But when the cameras were gone and the house grew quiet, his presence turned heavy. He would say, "What's the use of all this money if we can't live free?" and then wink at Esther as he ordered another drink. She did not judge aloud. It was not her place. But she noticed how he never asked Adana about her day, how he rolled his eyes when she took late-night business calls, how her gaze sometimes lingered with quiet sadness on the small wooden cradle displayed in a glass cabinet in the hallway, a cradle that had never held a child. The weight of that cradle seemed to hang in the air like a secret. That morning the house buzzed with its usual rhythm, but something unsettled Esther. She was mopping the living room floor when she heard a sound upstairs, Mr. Daniel's voice, sharp and low, echoing faintly through the corridor. She froze, the mop still dripping water. His tone was not playful, not careless. It was serious. "I told you, we're done waiting," he hissed. Her heart skipped. He was on the phone. "I can't spend the rest of my life like this. She can't give me a child. The wealth falls to me when she's gone. Her parents are dead. She's their only heir. We'll say it was stress. The doctor warned her to rest. No one will question." Esther's grip tightened on the mop handle. The water pooled around her feet, but she did not move. Her mind raced, but her body stayed still, like a cat ready to run, but waiting for the perfect second. She had learned to listen more than to speak, and in that moment every instinct told her, listen. Footsteps sounded behind her, and a faint perfume drifted in. It was Adana, carrying a folder and her reading glasses, walking toward her bedroom door, as if nothing could possibly be wrong. Esther's pulse surged. She knew that if Madame walked in now, she would hear too much, or perhaps become the target of something darker. In that instant, Esther moved faster than fear. She set the mop aside, stepped in front of her employer, and pressed her hand softly but firmly across her mouth. Adana froze, startled. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Don't speak," Esther whispered, her breath tight, her voice trembling but urgent. Adana blinked, stunned that her maid would dare such a gesture. But something in Esther's eyes, bright, pleading, unyielding, held her still. She didn't scream. She didn't push her away. She simply stayed, silent, listening. Through the half-closed door came Daniel's voice, lower now, as if he had moved deeper into the room. "Yes, I have the contact. 1 pill, that's all it takes. It will look natural. She's exhausted, everyone knows. Make sure it's clean. I don't want noise. I want freedom. I want a new wife. This one has given me nothing." The words cut like knives in the silence. Adana's face changed before Esther's eyes. First confusion, then comprehension, and finally a grief so deep it bent her shoulders. This was the man she had loved, trusted, shared her empire with. The man who smiled in photographs, toasted at galas, slept beside her at night. And yet, in the quiet of their home, he plotted her end as casually as a man might order new shoes. Esther felt Madame tremble. She took her hand gently, guiding her back down the hallway. Adana's lips moved, but no sound came. Esther mouthed words slowly so Madame could see. "Call the police." Adana nodded, tears already pooling in her eyes. They slipped quietly into the study, closing the door without a click. Adana's fingers shook as she dialed, her voice breaking when she whispered, "Emergency. Please come. My husband is planning to harm me." The operator asked questions. Adana answered in short, clipped words, her eyes fixed on Esther as though the maid had become her only anchor. When the call ended, the silence in the room felt alive, as if the walls themselves were listening. Outside, clouds gathered. Thunder rolled like a drum across the city. Rain began to fall, tapping against the tall windows of the mansion. The first storm of the season had arrived, and with it, the shadow over the Adeyemi household grew darker, promising a night unlike any other. The storm pressed harder against the windows, rain streaking down like tears. Inside the study, Esther stood still, her chest rising quickly, her hand still trembling from the decision she had just made. Madame Adana sat in the leather chair, her phone clutched tightly, eyes glassy as though she had seen a ghost. The silence was heavy, broken only by the muffled hum of Daniel's voice somewhere down the hall. Esther listened, her ears tuned to every shift in the house. She knew the police were coming, but she also knew minutes could stretch like hours when danger walked the same corridors. Adana finally found her voice. She turned her gaze to Esther, whispering with disbelief, "Did I hear him right? He spoke of ending me." Esther swallowed hard, her own words catching in her throat. "Yes, madam. I heard it too. He plans to make it look like illness." The older woman stared at her maid as though seeing her for the first time. "Why would you risk so much to protect me? You could have walked away, pretended you heard nothing." Esther's answer was quiet but steady. "Because silence can kill, madam. I know what silence cost me once. I couldn't let it happen again." Before Adana could reply, a sound froze them both. The turning of a doorknob. Daniel's steps echoed closer, measured and unhurried, the rhythm of a man who felt no fear. He hummed a tune, careless, his shadow stretching long against the polished floor as he approached. The study door trembled faintly in its frame. Esther moved instinctively, standing in front of Adana as if her own thin frame could shield the woman who employed her. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained calm. "Stay behind me," she murmured, eyes fixed on the handle. The door creaked open. Daniel entered, still holding his phone in one hand, his smile wide and polished. He scanned the room, his eyes landing first on Esther, then on Adana. "What's this?" he asked lightly, his tone dripping with silk. "A private meeting I wasn't invited to." His gaze lingered on the maid, almost amused. "Esther, isn't it? You look nervous. What secrets are you whispering to my wife?" Adana's lips parted as though to speak, but her voice faltered. Esther answered in her place, her tone respectful but firm. "We were waiting here, sir. Madam was unwell. She needed quiet." Daniel tilted his head, studying her, as if weighing the truth in her eyes. He chuckled softly and set his phone on the desk. "Unwell, yes. That's what everyone will say, that she was tired, worn down by the business, by the stress." He leaned against the desk, folding his arms, his eyes gleaming with something colder than malice, certainty. Adana's fingers tightened around the armrest. She wanted to cry out, to call him what he was, but Esther placed a steadying hand on her wrist, a silent plea for patience. Thunder cracked above the house, and in that sudden rumble, the shrill cry of sirens pierced the distance. Daniel stiffened. His smile faltered. He straightened from the desk, his eyes narrowing. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice losing its silky charm. He looked sharply at Adana. "Margaret, tell me you didn't—" He stopped himself, correcting his slip. "Adana, tell me you didn't call anyone." Adana rose slowly from her chair. Her voice shook, but it carried strength. "I heard every word, Daniel. You planned to kill me." For the first time his face changed. Gone was the arrogance, replaced by disbelief, then fury. He turned his gaze to Esther, his jaw tightening. "You," he hissed, "you put this poison in her mind." Esther didn't flinch. Her voice was calm. "No, sir. You poisoned it yourself." The sirens grew louder, swirling through the wet streets of Victoria Island, approaching the mansion gates. Daniel's eyes darted toward the window, then back to his wife. He laughed bitterly, the sound jagged and desperate. "You think the police will believe you? I am your husband. You've lived with me for years. Who will they think is lying? The man who shares your bed, or the maid who serves your tea?" His words hung heavy, but before either woman could answer, the front doors of the mansion burst open. Boots pounded against marble floors. The study door swung wide, and officers poured in, rain dripping from their uniforms, their guns raised with precision. The lead officer's voice was steady. "Daniel Adeyemi, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." Daniel recoiled as if struck. "What? This is madness!" His eyes shot to Adana, pleading and furious all at once. "Adana, tell them this is a mistake." Adana's hands trembled as she lowered her glasses. Her voice came cold, sharper than he had ever heard it. "No mistake. I heard you. Every word." Two officers stepped forward, seizing Daniel by the arms. He struggled, shouting, "This is a lie. I'm innocent. You know I love you." But his words sounded hollow, a desperate song out of tune. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, his gaze locked onto Esther, blazing with venom. "You did this," he spat. "This is your doing." Esther met his stare, her own eyes steady as stone. "No, sir. This is yours." The officers dragged him out, his voice echoing through the hallways, claiming innocence, begging, cursing. The sound faded as the doors slammed shut behind him. The house fell into a silence that was heavier than any thunder. Only the storm outside continued its relentless pounding. Adana sank back into the chair, her strength stripped away. She removed her glasses with trembling fingers, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Esther knelt beside her, speaking softly. "Madam, are you all right?" Adana reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. Her voice was cracked but steady. "If you hadn't stopped me, if you hadn't told me to listen—" She broke off, shaking her head. "You saved my life." Esther lowered her gaze, her throat tight. "I only did what was right." But Adana cupped her face with trembling hands, forcing her to look up. "No, you gave me truth." The words lingered like a promise as the storm raged on outside. And though Daniel was gone, Esther knew in her bones this was only the beginning. Because storms never end in a single night. Daniel Adeyemi had not always been the shadow of a man pacing marble corridors, plotting whispers over the phone. Once he was the charming suitor who had swept Adana off her feet, the man who knew how to wear a suit, how to smile at the right time, how to laugh just enough to be remembered. He had grown up in the city, son of a government official who lost everything after one bad deal. Daniel had tasted wealth early, then watched it crumble like dust in his hands. That hunger for comfort never left him. When he met Adana at a gala in Abuja, she was radiant, her name already attached to the empire she was building. He saw not just a woman, but a door back into the life he had lost. At that party, he leaned close to her with the confidence of a man who had nothing to lose. "You don't belong here," he said flatly, his voice carrying both flattery and challenge. Adana had arched an eyebrow. "And where do I belong, Mr. Daniel?" he said smoothly, offering his hand. "You belong somewhere bigger, and I could be the man who walks beside you." She had laughed then, amused but intrigued, and within months their photographs filled society magazines, their smiles plastered across glossy covers. People called them the perfect couple, the visionary and her elegant husband. But perfection was a mask, and masks eventually slip. As the years passed, Adana buried herself in the company she built. Her days were long, her nights full of meetings and travel. The small wooden cradle she kept in the hallway reminded her of what she never had, a child. For Daniel, the empty cradle was not just a wound, but an opportunity. Without heirs, the fortune would pass to him. It was then that another figure entered his life, a young woman named Naomi. She was 25, ambitious, and beautiful in a way that demanded attention. He met her at a private club in Lekki, where laughter mixed with the clink of glasses and promises were traded like currency. She was bold, and when she spoke, her words were sharp. "You're married to one of the richest women in the country, and yet here you sit, pretending to be bored." Daniel had smiled, leaning back. Marriage doesn't erase desire, and boredom doesn't erase opportunity. Their affair began like a spark, but Naomi wanted more than secret dinners and expensive gifts. She wanted the life Adana had. She wanted the mansion, the empire, the title. One evening, as they sat in a hotel room overlooking the lagoon, Naomi tossed aside the diamond bracelet he had given her. "I'm tired of waiting, Daniel," she said coldly. "You promised me everything, but promises don't buy tomorrow. When will she be out of the picture?" Daniel poured himself another drink, his face calm, but his hand tight around the glass. "These things take time. Patience is a virtue." Naomi leaned closer, her voice like a blade. "Patience is a lie men use to waste women's lives. If you don't deliver, I will. Do you understand me?" Daniel looked at her, his smile never faltering, but his eyes dark. "Careful, Naomi. Threats are dangerous things to throw into the air. They might land back on you." But that night, as he lay awake beside her, he understood that time was slipping. He was no longer only battling Adana's strength or the weight of public appearances. He was battling Naomi's impatience, and her impatience was as sharp as glass. The storm outside the mansion that night raged on, but Daniel's storm had begun long before. Every step, every lie, every smile at the cameras had led him here, to the edge of exposure. The next morning, the newspapers blared with his face on the cover. "Husband of textile queen arrested in shocking conspiracy." The headlines screamed betrayal, greed, and scandal. Inside his cell, Daniel sat with his back against the wall, staring at the iron bars. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. He could still hear Naomi's words in his head. "If you don't deliver, I will." He closed his eyes, replaying the moment the officers burst into the study. The look in Adana's eyes when she said, "I heard every word." That look haunted him more than the bars, more than the chains. It was the look of someone who had given him everything and realized she had given it to a stranger. But in his heart, Daniel told himself it wasn't over. Men like him didn't fade quietly. He would find a way to turn the story, to twist the truth, to survive. And while Esther and Adana breathed relief in the quiet of the mansion, Daniel's storm continued to brew in the shadows, waiting for its next strike. The storm rolled in from the Atlantic with a vengeance. Sheets of rain whipped against the mansion walls, thunder cracked overhead, and lightning lit the sky in violent flashes. Inside, the Adeyemi home glowed softly, chandeliers casting light across polished floors, the illusion of safety trembling against the chaos outside. Esther moved quietly through the living room, her heart unsettled. Every task she performed felt heavier that night. She straightened the dining table, polished the silver cutlery, and set the crystal glasses carefully. But something deep inside warned her that nothing would remain in its place for long. In the kitchen, the chef prepared a late dinner. Esther's eyes caught sight of Daniel lingering near the counter, a wine bottle in hand. His voice was too casual as he told the chef, "This one will do. Madam likes it chilled." The chef nodded, unaware of the undercurrent in his tone. But Esther saw it. She noticed the way Daniel's hand lingered over the bottle just a fraction too long, the way his gaze flicked toward the drawer where small packets of pills were hidden from his latest doctor's visit. She had seen him slip one into his pocket earlier that week. Her throat tightened. She knew. As the chef left to fetch more plates, Daniel poured the wine into 2 glasses. His smile was sharp as he whispered under his breath, "To new beginnings." Esther's instincts screamed. She moved swiftly, carrying a folded napkin to the table. As Daniel turned his back, she brushed her hand against one of the glasses, pretending to adjust the setting. The faintest shimmer of powder swirled before vanishing into the liquid. She shifted the glasses without hesitation. If anyone was going to drink the poisoned one, it would not be Madame Adana. The dining room door opened. Adana entered, her presence commanding even in her blue lace wrapper, her glasses hanging low on her nose. She looked tired, but her voice carried calm authority. "Daniel, thank you for preparing dinner." He turned to her, his smile easy. "For my wife, always. Sit, my love." Esther stood at the side, holding her breath, as Adana lowered herself into the chair. The storm outside raged louder, wind rattling the tall windows. Daniel lifted his glass. "To us," he said smoothly, raising it toward her. Adana reached for hers, but Esther stepped forward quickly. "Madam, forgive me," she said softly. "I must change the napkin, it has a stain." Adana paused, frowning faintly. Daniel's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across his face. "She can drink, Esther. Don't fuss." Esther lowered her gaze humbly. "Of course, sir." She set down a fresh napkin and in the same motion nudged the poisoned glass away from Adana's hand. She lifted the safer glass with a quiet bow and placed it before her. Adana picked it up, unaware of the silent exchange. Daniel's jaw clenched, but he said nothing, forcing a smile. They drank. The moment stretched like wire. Daniel glanced at his own glass, then at his wife. A muscle twitched in his cheek. "How do you feel?" he asked lightly, almost too lightly. Adana raised an eyebrow. "Tired, Daniel. Why do you ask?" Before he could reply, Esther slipped from the dining room, her heart pounding against her ribs. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket, hands trembling as she tapped the record button. She had caught fragments before, but now she needed proof, real proof. She lingered near the kitchen entrance, hidden in shadow, as Daniel's voice dropped low. He leaned across the table toward his wife. "You work too hard. The company consumes you. It would be a mercy if you rested forever." Adana's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. "I'm saying," Daniel replied, his voice dripping with honey, "that everything becomes mine when you're gone. And then I will finally live free." Her face drained of color. "You speak of my death as if it were a business deal." Daniel laughed softly. "In the end, life is a business deal." The words struck her like cold steel. She set down her glass, her hands shaking. At that moment, the storm outside roared louder, and blue lights flashed faintly through the rain-streaked windows. Sirens. Daniel's head whipped toward the sound, his calm unraveling. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice sharp, no longer masked with charm. Adana rose from her chair, her voice trembling but clear. "I called for help." Daniel slammed his hand against the table, rattling the silverware. "You betrayed me." His eyes darted around, frantic like a trapped animal. "I gave you everything, Adana." Esther stepped into the room then, holding up her phone. "No, sir," she said steadily. "She gave you everything, and you gave her betrayal." His eyes burned as he realized she had been recording. "You little snake," he spat, lunging toward her. But before his hand could reach her, the front doors burst open again. Heavy boots pounded across the marble floor. Officers stormed the dining room, their shouts cutting through the thunder. The lead officer raised his voice over the storm. "Daniel Adeyemi, you are under arrest." Daniel froze, his body trembling with fury. "No, this is a trap. You can't do this." Two officers grabbed him by the arms, dragging him back. He struggled, his voice hoarse. "Adana, tell them. Tell them you still love me. Tell them this is madness." Adana stood tall, her tears flowing freely now. "I did love you," she said, her voice breaking but firm. "But love does not survive poison." Daniel's knees buckled as they forced him toward the door. He twisted his head toward Esther, his face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "You think she will keep you? You are nothing but a servant." Esther's reply was calm, her voice unshaken. "Better a servant of truth than a master of lies." The officers shoved him out into the storm, his voice still echoing through the house until it was swallowed by the thunder. Silence followed, heavy and trembling. Adana sank slowly into her chair, her hand clutching her chest as though holding herself together. Esther hurried to her side, kneeling, whispering softly, "Madam, you're safe now." Adana's tears fell freely. "Safe, yes, but broken inside." Esther held her hand tightly. "Sometimes, madam, broken things can be mended, but they must first be saved." Outside, the rain poured harder, washing over the city like a cleansing tide. And though the storm would pass, Esther knew the echoes of this night would not. The world beyond the gates was already stirring, waiting to devour the scandal that was about to unfold. The storm had passed, but the city had not gone quiet. By dawn, the news had spread like fire. Headlines screamed betrayal. Husband of textile queen arrested in murder plot. Photographers camped outside the courthouse, their cameras waiting for a glimpse of the woman who had survived her husband's scheme. Inside the grand wooden courtroom, Esther sat beside Madame Adana on the polished bench. She was no longer in her plain maid's dress. Instead, Adana had insisted she wear a golden gown that shimmered softly against her dark skin. Her hair, usually tied back for work, was styled neatly. She looked transformed, though her heart still pounded with the weight of the night before. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. People leaned toward each other, muttering, "That's the maid, the one who heard it all. That's the woman who saved her." Others simply stared, their eyes wide with curiosity. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." The judge entered, his face stern, his robe flowing as he took his seat. The room fell silent. Moments later, Daniel was led in, flanked by officers. His wrists were chained, his suit wrinkled from the night in custody, but his head was held high, eyes scanning the room for allies. He found none. His gaze landed on Adana, then on Esther. His voice cracked as he whispered harshly, "This is not over." The prosecutor rose first, his tone sharp. "Your Honor, we will present evidence that the defendant, Daniel Adeyemi, conspired to take the life of his wife, Madame Adana Adeyemi, in order to inherit her wealth. We will prove this through testimony and, most importantly, through his own words." Daniel shifted uneasily, his jaw tightening. He muttered under his breath, "What words?" The prosecutor signaled, and a recording filled the courtroom. Daniel's voice emerged, smooth and damning. "She can't give me a child. Her wealth is mine when she's gone. We'll make it look natural. I want freedom. I want a new wife. This one has given me nothing." Gasps rippled through the audience. A woman covered her mouth, another shook her head in disbelief. All eyes turned to Adana, who sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Daniel shot to his feet, his voice desperate. "It was a joke, a foolish joke. I never meant any of it." The judge's expression remained unmoved. "You admit it is your voice?" Daniel hesitated. "Yes, but—" The judge cut him off. "That is sufficient." From the witness stand, the prosecution called Esther. She walked slowly to the front, her golden gown gleaming under the harsh lights. She raised her right hand, swore the oath, and faced the room. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke. "I heard him planning it. I was carrying towels when I stopped outside the door. I heard him say she had no child, that everything would be his when Madame was gone. I saw him pour wine that night. I saw him slip the pills into his pocket. If Madame had drunk it, she would not be here today." Daniel's voice rang out sharply. "She lies. She's a servant, nothing more. She seeks favor, not truth." But the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "Sit down, Mr. Adeyemi." Then came the unexpected. The prosecutor called a new witness, Naomi. Gasps spread again as the young woman stepped forward, her heels clicking on the marble. She was stunning, with hair perfectly styled, but her eyes carried shadows. She sat, lifted her chin, and spoke without hesitation. "He told me everything," Naomi said, her voice steady. "He promised me a life. He promised me her mansion, her empire, her name. He said all he needed was patience. But when I pressed him, he said it would happen soon, that her health was fragile, that it would be natural. I wanted more than his promises. I wanted the truth, and here it is." Daniel's face drained of color. "You traitor," he hissed, his voice breaking. "You said you loved me." Naomi looked at him coldly. "I love the dream, not the lie." The courtroom buzzed louder than before, the weight of betrayal pressing in on all sides. The prosecutor's voice cut through the noise. "Your Honor, this man plotted not only against his wife, but against the life she built, against every trust she placed in him. We ask for the full weight of the law." The judge's gavel struck once, silencing the crowd. His words fell heavy. "This court finds Daniel Adeyemi guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. He is hereby sentenced to 10 years in prison." The room erupted. Some cheered, others whispered furiously. Reporters scribbled notes, their cameras flashing as Daniel was dragged away, shouting, "I am innocent! This is all a setup!" Adana sat motionless, her tears flowing quietly. She turned to Esther, gripping her hand. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Thank you for saving me." Esther lowered her gaze. "I only did what was right, madam." But Adana shook her head, her words steady despite her tears. "No, you did more than that. You gave me back my life." And then, in a moment that stunned everyone present, Adana rose to her feet. She faced the press, her glasses glinting under the lights. Her voice carried strength. "This woman is no longer just my maid. From today, she is my daughter." The room froze. Reporters gasped, cameras flashed wildly, questions shouted. Esther's chest tightened, her eyes filling with tears. She bowed her head, overwhelmed. Adana placed a hand firmly on her shoulder. She stood for truth when silence would have killed, and truth makes family. The gavel struck again, calling for order, but the words had already traveled far beyond the courtroom walls. By the time they stepped back into the storm-soaked streets, Esther's life had already changed forever. And though she didn't yet know how heavy that new name, daughter, would feel on her shoulders, she knew one thing with certainty: the world would never look at her the same way again. The mansion no longer felt the same. Where shadows once lingered in corners, sunlight now spilled freely through tall windows. Yet for Esther, the greatest change was not the house itself, but the way the world looked at her. She was no longer just the maid who rose before dawn. After the trial, after Madame Adana's declaration, she was introduced to society as family. The golden gown had been more than clothing. It had been a symbol of transformation. And with transformation came both privilege and weight. 1 week later, Adana placed a set of papers on the study table. "These are the entrance forms," she said firmly, her glasses slipping low on her nose. "You will take the university exams. You have a sharp mind, Esther. It's time the world sees it." Esther blinked, stunned. "University, madam? I never thought—" Adana interrupted softly. "Don't call me madam anymore. You are my daughter now. Call me mother." The word felt foreign on Esther's tongue, but when she whispered, "Yes, mother," she saw tears glisten in Adana's eyes. Weeks of study followed. Nights stretched long as Esther pored over textbooks, her careful hands now turning pages instead of scrubbing marble. She sat at the edge of her bed, whispering formulas under her breath, repeating historical dates until they etched themselves into her memory. When exam day arrived, she walked into the hall in a crisp white blouse and navy skirt. Whispers followed her. Students glanced her way, some curious, some mocking. "That's the girl Madame Adana adopted," one whispered loudly. "She was a maid," another scoffed. "Now she thinks she belongs with us." Esther kept her head high, remembering Adana's words. "Hold your head high. You belong here." Her results came weeks later. She had passed with top marks. Adana enrolled her in one of the best universities in Lagos to study accountancy. But the golden path was not smooth. From the first day of lectures, whispers clung to her like shadows. Some classmates muttered that she had bought her way in. Others claimed she was only there because of her mother's wealth. During a seminar, one student, a tall boy with a sharp tongue, leaned across the desk. "You don't belong here," he said flatly, his smirk widening. "Books don't erase who you were." For a moment, Esther's throat tightened, but before she could reply, another voice cut in from behind. "Maybe you should focus on your own grades instead of hers," the voice said firmly. She turned to see him. His name was Emmanuel Johnson, though most called him simply Johnson. He was young, sharp-featured, and carried himself with quiet confidence. Unlike many, his gaze didn't linger on her with judgment. It held curiosity, even respect. The tall boy scoffed and leaned back. "Defender of lost causes," he muttered. But Esther caught the faintest smile from Johnson, and for the first time that day her heart felt lighter. Weeks turned into months. Classes were demanding. Nights once filled with the rhythm of cleaning now pulsed with late study sessions in the library. She carried heavy textbooks, scribbled notes until her hands cramped, and sometimes stared at the pages through tears when exhaustion blurred the words. But through it all, Johnson appeared like an unexpected anchor. Sometimes he dropped an extra pen on her desk without a word when hers broke. Sometimes he stayed late in the library too, and when their eyes met over stacks of papers, he would say simply, "Keep going, you're stronger than you think." One evening, after a long economics lecture, Esther stepped outside into the courtyard, her books clutched to her chest. Rain had just passed, and the stones glistened under the campus lights. Johnson caught up to her, his bag slung carelessly over his shoulder. "You always walk like the world is chasing you," he said lightly, matching her pace. She glanced at him, uncertain whether to laugh. "And you always talk like you have no worries." He shrugged. "I have plenty. But life doesn't wait for us to solve them before it keeps moving, so I move with it." Her step slowed. "Do you believe people can really change? That someone like me can belong in a place like this?" He stopped, turning to face her under the soft glow of the streetlight. His answer was steady. "Belonging isn't given, Esther, it's proven, and from what I see, you've proven more than anyone here." Her chest tightened at his words. For a moment, the noise of the campus faded, and all she felt was the weight and comfort of his gaze. But the world was not kind for long. At the university's annual business conference, Esther was invited to speak on a student panel. She prepared carefully, her notes written with precision. But when she stepped onto the stage, whispers rose from the audience. A girl in the front row muttered loudly enough for the crowd to hear, "She's just a maid dressed in gold. Let's see if she can even speak without stuttering." The laughter that followed cut deep. Esther froze at the podium, her hands trembling. Then, from the back of the hall, Johnson's voice rang out clearly. "Give her the respect she deserves, or perhaps you've forgotten that courage speaks louder than privilege." The room quieted. Esther lifted her chin, took a breath, and began. Her voice shook at first, but as she spoke of resilience, of the strength found in hardship, the words grew steadier. She spoke not as a girl ashamed of her past, but as a woman unafraid to claim her place in the future. When she finished, the applause was louder than the laughter had been. Adana, seated in the front row, wiped a tear from her eye. Johnson met her gaze across the hall and gave a small, proud nod. That night, Esther returned to the mansion exhausted but hopeful. She sat with Adana in the study, sipping tea. "Mother," she whispered, "today I was humiliated, but I found my voice. Maybe this is what it means to belong." Adana smiled gently, placing her hand over hers. "Belonging is not about where you start, Esther. It's about the courage to keep standing when the world tells you to sit." Outside, the city lights shimmered. Inside, for the first time since she had stepped into the golden life, Esther felt not just like a guest in someone else's world, but like someone building her own. And somewhere in the quiet of her heart, she knew Johnson had become part of that world too. Years passed quickly after Esther's first trembling speech at the university. She grew sharper, more confident, her diligence carving out a reputation among her peers. By the time graduation arrived, she was no longer simply the maid who became a daughter. She was Esther Adeyemi, best student in her department, carrying her degree with pride while the auditorium erupted with applause. Adana sat in the front row that day, clapping with tears glistening in her eyes. She had watched Esther walk across the stage in her cap and gown, her stride steady, her head high. Later that night, she whispered to her in the car, "Your strength has given me strength. You make me believe in second chances." Second chances. The words lingered in Adana's heart long after the celebrations ended. 2 years passed in what felt like a heartbeat. Esther joined her mother's company as an account officer, her careful hands now managing balance sheets and strategies rather than flower arrangements and towels. She walked into boardrooms with quiet authority, her reports earning nods of respect from seasoned executives. The world was beginning to see her not as an outsider, but as a woman who belonged. It was during those busy months that her bond with Johnson deepened. They met for late-night dinners after long workdays, shared books, exchanged laughter that spilled into the small hours. He noticed the tired lines on her face before she did, and reminded her to rest. She noticed the hope in his eyes when he spoke of his dreams, and encouraged him to chase them. One evening, on the balcony of a restaurant overlooking the lagoon, Johnson reached for her hand. "Esther," he said softly, "I have walked through many rooms in this city, but only when I walk beside you do I feel at home. Will you marry me?" Her breath caught. She saw sincerity in his gaze, warmth in his trembling hand. She whispered, "Yes," and his relief turned to joy as he pulled her close. Their wedding was a grand affair. Adana spared no expense, ensuring her daughter had the kind of celebration she once thought belonged only to dreams. Esther walked down the aisle in a flowing white gown, her heart pounding with gratitude and wonder. Johnson stood waiting, his eyes fixed only on her. Adana, seated near the front, wept openly, her joy brighter than any diamond in the hall. But even as laughter filled the reception, a shadow lingered in Adana's heart. Daniel had been gone for years now, locked away behind prison gates. But his betrayal still clung to her spirit like smoke. She had survived, yes, but survival was not the same as healing. 2 years after Esther's wedding, as the mansion brimmed with the sound of family dinners and occasional visits from Johnson and Esther, Adana made a decision. One afternoon, she sat with Esther in the garden beneath the mango trees, the air heavy with the scent of blossoms. She adjusted her glasses and spoke slowly. "My child," she began, "I have carried Daniel's betrayal in my chest like a stone, but forgiveness is not about them deserving it. It is about freeing ourselves. Tomorrow, I will see him." Esther's eyes widened. "Mother, after everything he planned to do to you, why?" Adana smiled faintly, though sorrow lined her face. Because strength is not only in punishing, it is also in letting go. The next morning, Esther accompanied her to the prison. The iron gates closed behind them with a metallic echo that sent a chill through her body. Guards led them down narrow halls until they stopped at a small visitation room. Daniel entered slowly. His once proud frame had withered, his shoulders bent, his hair streaked with grey. He looked older, diminished, as though the years had gnawed away his arrogance. When his eyes met Adana's, he froze. Slowly, he sank to his knees, tears spilling freely. "I don't deserve to see you," he whispered, his voice broken. "I was blind, greedy, foolish, yet here you stand." Adana's voice was steady, calm like a river. "You tried to destroy me, Daniel. You betrayed the woman who gave you everything, but I refuse to live forever in chains of anger. I am withdrawing the case. You will be released, but our marriage ends today." From her bag, she drew out papers, placing them before him. Divorce, final and complete. Daniel's sobs filled the room. "You forgive me? After all I did?" "Yes," she answered softly, her eyes glistening, "because I choose peace." Then she reached once more into her bag and pulled out another document. It was an account transfer of $1 million. She laid it on the table between them. "Start your life again, use it well, let this be your second chance." Daniel collapsed fully, pressing his face to the cold floor. His voice cracked as he cried, "I don't deserve this kindness." Adana turned away, her strength trembling now. Esther placed a hand under her arm, supporting her as they left the room. Behind them, Daniel wept, clutching papers he never imagined he would hold. Divorce, freedom, and mercy, all at once. When they stepped back into the bright Lagos sun, Adana's voice wavered. "The past is behind me now. The future belongs to us." 2 years later, that future arrived in the soft cry of a newborn. Esther held her baby girl in her arms, her heart swelling with wonder. She and Johnson named her Amara Grace. When Adana carried the child for the first time, tears streamed down her cheeks. She kissed the tiny forehead and whispered, "This is the dream I thought would never come true." In that moment, as laughter filled the mansion once more, Esther realized her journey had come full circle. She was no longer the orphan who scrubbed floors in silence. She was a daughter, a wife, a mother, and a woman whose courage had saved her family and reshaped her destiny. And in the quiet of the garden, with Amara sleeping peacefully, Adana finally felt the peace she had long been denied. The storm that once haunted the mansion had passed, leaving only sunlight behind. The years that followed brought change not only to the Adeyemi mansion, but to the city beyond its gates. Time softened wounds and built new walls of strength. For Esther, life unfolded with a rhythm she once only dreamed of. Papers to sign, meetings to attend, dinners to prepare with Johnson, and nights spent listening to her daughter's soft breathing. The world had not forgotten the scandal. Every so often reporters revisited the story. The betrayed wife, the murderous husband, the maid who became a daughter. But gradually the whispers gave way to respect. Esther was no longer described only by her past. She was recognized for her present, a skilled account officer, a woman whose intelligence steadied one of the nation's largest textile companies. At home, the mansion pulsed with new life. Amara Grace grew quickly, her laughter filling corners that once echoed with silence. Adana often carried her through the halls, whispering softly, "You are the joy I thought would never be mine." But the past never vanished completely. One afternoon, as Esther reviewed company files in her office, the receptionist entered quietly. "Madam Esther," she said, hesitant, "there is a man outside asking to see you. He says his name is Daniel Adeyemi." The pen slipped from Esther's fingers. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. She rose slowly, her heart thudding, and walked to the front of the building. There he stood. Daniel. His once sharp frame was leaner, his posture humbled. His hair had turned silver, his clothes plain. He removed his hat when he saw her, his voice low. "Esther." Her first instinct was to turn him away, but she remembered her mother's words about peace. She asked quietly, "Why are you here?" He shifted uneasily, eyes lowered. "I wanted to thank you. If not for your courage, I might have succeeded in a crime that would have destroyed everything. Prison broke me, yes, but your mother's forgiveness rebuilt me. The money she gave me, I used it to start again. I live simply now away from the city. I came only to say I am sorry." Esther studied him. The anger she expected to feel did not rise. Instead, there was pity, tinged with caution. "Your apology is not mine to accept," she said calmly. "It belongs to the woman you betrayed." Daniel's eyes glistened. "And she gave it already. That mercy is the only reason I still breathe." She nodded slowly. "Then live quietly. That is all you can do." He bowed his head, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. That night, Esther shared the meeting with Adana. The older woman listened in silence, her hand resting gently on Amara's cradle. Finally, she spoke. "I gave him forgiveness, not because he earned it, but because I needed to be free. I'm glad he found you too, so you would see what peace can do." Esther whispered, "Mother, I think I finally understand. The real inheritance you gave me was not the company, not the wealth. It was the courage to stand for truth and the grace to forgive." Adana smiled faintly. "And you will pass that on to Amara, in ways richer than gold." Months later, the company hosted its annual gala. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the air filled with laughter and music. Esther stood with Johnson at her side, Amara asleep in her grandmother's arms. Guests approached, congratulating, praising, offering respect. One investor said warmly, "Madam Esther, your strategies saved us last quarter. You've truly inherited your mother's brilliance." Esther's gaze shifted to Adana, who held Amara close, rocking her gently. She replied, "I inherited more than brilliance. I inherited the strength to build a home where peace can live." The night carried on with speeches and toasts, but for Esther, the true celebration was quiet. The sight of her daughter safe in her grandmother's arms, the sound of Johnson's laughter, the weight of a family rebuilt from ashes. Later, as the gala ended, Adana drew Esther aside. "When I leave this world, the company will be yours. But remember, power is not the true legacy. Love is. Courage is. Those are the threads that never tear." Esther embraced her, whispering, "I will not forget." The years would test her. Of that she was certain. There would be storms, as life always promised, but she knew now that storms could be survived, and even from them, new gardens could grow. In the quiet hours of the night, as Amara slept peacefully, Esther often stood by the window gazing out at the city lights. She thought of where she had begun, an orphan scrubbing marble floors before dawn, and where she had arrived, surrounded by love and respect. She knew the journey had never been about wealth or titles. It had been about finding her voice when silence seemed safer, about choosing truth when lies offered comfort, about learning that forgiveness, though hard, was the only way to step fully into the future. And so the mansion that once echoed with betrayal now sang with new life. Esther's invisible inheritance, the strength of truth, the gift of forgiveness, and the courage to love, was the legacy that would endure long after gold had lost its shine. In the end, this story reminds us that truth and courage can change destinies, and forgiveness can set hearts free. If this journey moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here.